David, let's talk the new album.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about it.
So it's a very pandemic kind of album. It started out in Oregon as with bass, drums, and guitar, and then we sent all those tracks to Ireland for the rest of the treatment that Paul McAdam, an Irish musician and home studio producer engineer, lives, and he added tracks and mixed and mastered the whole thing, and it just came out last week on Bandcamp, and it'll be out on the streaming platforms such as the dreaded Spotify sometime in the next couple weeks.
Maybe you'll get compensated better as a result of this protest. So here it is. It's called Rebel Songs. You can find it on David's Bandcamp, which is davidrovics.bandcamp.com. And yeah, do you want to play a track for us?
Sure. I mean, let's see. How do you do it? You can do that from there, or from the Bandcamp page there, or is that?
I can play something off the Bandcamp.
Mm-hmm.
You can also just play a song on guitar, whichever you want to do first. Yeah, however you want to do it, whatever order you want to do it in. I don't want to.
Well, either way, but if you want to hear what the album's like, then it's not going to be like me playing live. So either way, but I'm happy to do either. But if you play "Water on the Moon" from Bandcamp, then you'll get the most studio affected sort of track on there that I could never reproduce.
Sure.
Here.
Well, let's play it. We're not going to play the whole thing because of copyright issues, even though I could still get dinged, even though you're literally the owner and you're right here asking me to play it. This one isn't even registered on BMI yet. So I guess, really?
I guess it's not only registered Creative Commons, but it's not registered anywhere else yet. So I guess you'd be safe.
So I might be safe.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such an annoying thing with the whole copyright question. And I mean, yeah. Anyway, we could talk about that for an hour, but I mean, I'm all for artists making money off of their music, but the idea that should mean that you can't play one of my tracks in your podcast is completely backwards.
Well, that's the thing. I'm all about it too, and I think the protections are great and important, but when it's just sort of a robot picking up sounds and they have no nuance and they have no context, so they don't know the difference between somebody taking someone's music and just posting it and trying to make money off of it, which of course is wrong. Yeah. And the difference between that and somebody doing an interview with the frickin' artist.
I know, exactly. And
that's the problem. They don't differentiate.
Yeah, and we cannot have bots running our lives. So anti-social media bots that are controlling our communication, taking away our platforms if we say anything too socialist. I mean, people are getting their Twitter and Facebook accounts taken away all the time over the past few months. It's not just the right wing, it's the left wing all over the world. It's happening.
Absolutely. Well, hey, this is why it's time, and we talk about these issues on the show a lot because there's a lot of misinformation out there about like what policies we should be pursuing, and I think the overall fix is it's time for a real solid digital Bill of Rights. The solution is not to mess with Section 230, not to mess with things that have been pillars of free speech on the internet, but instead to add new policy that actually meets the moment in the form of a digital Bill of Rights. But anyway, all right, so let's play some of this song and then let's talk about it. So there's Water on the Moon. This is off the new album, Rebel Songs by David Rovics. And here's the one he wants us to play first. Boom.
The news isn't getting any brighter. The death toll isn't getting any lighter. There's a dark pall drifting overhead with so many more people dead. Turn on the computer or the TV. It's a world full of anger and death threats. What could happen if life could be supported somewhere else where things might be better sorted? A place where some could start anew, another way to say we're not through, despite all of the destruction, all the bad decisions made, all of the madness we could trade for a place more remote than primate or penguin has ever been. There's a discovery, a silver lining for the cloud that has some folks singing out loud. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. The cafes are all closed. You won't miss the sight of someone bringing to your table a flat white. We can still make espresso up there in our bubbles, breathing freshly manufactured air. When we go outside, we can jump so high. You speak into your mic, I'll hear your reply. We can look at the green earth, wish it well, from up in the place that makes the waves swell. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. Up there, life is simple with just a couple distractions. Too few of us to form a faction. We all practice great lunar hygiene, all tested, cleared, and quarantined. Go back to visit now and again the planet we lived in way back when, before the satellites found H2O. And some of us said, fuck it, let's go. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. There's water on the moon way up there. Maybe you and I should go live on a frozen lake without a care, looking down at the earth below. There's water on the moon.
It's a great tune.
Well, thank you.
It's a really cool tune, man. I like the vocal effects you got going on.
Isn't that cool? I love that, and his weird keyboard and that spacey kind of sound. I feel like I'm in outer space. I just love it.
That's the vibe. That's the vibe.
Yeah, he nailed it. I think that Star Trek kind of vibe. Yeah.
Elon Musk is going to play that for his family when he builds his colony on Mars. He's going to.
Well, if Elon likes the song, that's good. It's hopefully, okay if he likes it.
Well, that's fine if he likes it. I hope he pays you something pretty for it. If he's gonna use it in his soundtrack, he's got to compensate you well. That's what I think.
That's for sure. I'll definitely take some serious compensation for that.
So, what are some other highlights you want to talk? I mean, I've listened to a lot of this. I haven't listened to all of it yet, but I've listened to a lot of it, and like most of your stuff, it is very timely. It is very poignant. It is very topical. It mixes moments of not extreme, but very powerful sincerity, tear-jerking sincerity, but also a lot of moments of a lot of humor and tongue-in-cheek and kind of being able to laugh at at the world around us to keep us from going insane. So it's very much kind of what you've come to expect from a David Rovics album, I feel like, and I mean that in a good way.
Thank you. I'm very happy with it. And of course, it's also like, kind of partly happened because of the Oregon Employment Department, finally sending us money. But what I'm especially also excited about in terms of really timely stuff is just this track I sent you that this amazing punk rock band in Olympia just kind of sent me out of the blue. I mean, I just wrote a song last week called "It's Been a Year" on the 1-year anniversary of the first COVID case being found in Oregon. And then like 2 days later, I heard from this punk rock outfit from Olympia that sent me a karaoke track of the song I had just written, which was just amazing. And then I put vocals onto it, and then they mixed it down and made this track. So it's the first time I've ever had quite that experience of somebody just sending me an entirely well worked out karaoke track.
So here it is.
A year since the virus arrived. A year since in this country 500,000 died. A year since all the borders were starting to be sealed. A year since the hospitals were sprouting with fields. No question for anyone living around here. It's been a year. It's been a year since the cafes all closed. Since the dates on the calendars froze. As the windows turned to plywood and the plywood turned to art. And unless you were essential or worked in a food cart, then you just had to cope with the anxiety and fear. It's been a year. It's been a year since the wheels in motion led to an uprising on each side of the ocean, exposed by the pandemic, by inequality. 846 of the neck beneath the knee. A time of counter demos for a while, a coup seemed near. It's been a year. It's been a year since canceling the rent. A year since the last of the money was spent. So many people saw we're all vectors for disease, and there is such a thing as society. Since the words mutual aid became ones you'll commonly hear, along with grim milestone. It's been a year. It's been a year. It's been a year. It's been a year.
That's it. What's that? I forgot that it did that. It just ends and then it goes on. That's part of the MP3 that they sent me, and I forgot how that got in there. I didn't actually even listen to that part.
That's like was that an outro? Or was that like
that was
track?
Either an outro or something. You know what? I think that was an outro that I actually put up without even paying attention to it because I thought the track was over.
It's great.
Somebody
man.
mentioned like, "What's that?" And then I was like, "What are you talking about?" Now I know what they're talking about. That's it. That's what they're talking about.
So you wrote this song. This band from Olympia got a hold of it, and they recorded that, sent it back to you. So you sang over it, and the result is what we just listened to.
Yeah, exactly.
So who is the band from Olympia?
They're called Virtual Bird.
Virtual Bird.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Virtual
and I had never
Bird,
heard of them. Yeah.
That's really cool. And they're right near you. Well, now you guys, once everything opens up, you all have to do some shows together. I mean, you're in Portland. They're in Olympia, which are real close.
Definitely.
So now you all have to do shows together where you'll close with doing this song together.
That's absolutely the plan. Whenever that starts happening again, who knows? 2022, who knows?
Oh, geez. Yeah. It's almost too depressing to think about. And I feel I try to be very conscious when I say things like that, because I know that there are people who are suffering immensely right now. And obviously being housing and food insecure is much more significant than I really miss performing live. But it is, I mean, musicians, comedians, like it's not just how we make our livings. It's also a big part of who we are. And it's just gone right now. And it just, I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of comedians, especially, I mean, comedians die very frequently, and that's something a
Yeah.
lot of people do know about, and it's not something that gets talked about all that often. But comedians die very frequently, and this past year, comics have been dropping like flies, and that's why. I mean, so many of them, it's like their sense of purpose is just gone for a lot of people, and just they kind of give up, and it's really heavy and tough. And so you really hope that it gets back soon, and we can go safely. And I don't know when that's going to be. The optimist in me is saying fall, but I don't know.
I'm hoping for fall. I'm kind of very, very tentatively making some, not plans, but like, sort of more like feelers for plans for November, because the COP, the climate talks this year are happening in Scotland in November, and that's definitely part of my stomping grounds. So I'd love to get over there if that's going to be possible by then. But otherwise, who knows? I mean, maybe who knows what's going to happen? I've certainly anybody that's been trying to predict the future in the past year is not doing very well at that. So I wouldn't want to even try to predict past the next week, let alone into 2022. But I mean, one thing that's for sure about the past year is that it's been not only a health crisis and an economic crisis, but a major mental health crisis. And I mean, 65% of formerly employed or working artists in the United States are fully unemployed, as of the pandemic, according to Bill Dervisowitz, who wrote an article about it recently and wrote the book, The Death of the Artist, which is a fantastic book about the state of the arts prior to the pandemic, where these corporations like Spotify and have largely strangled, basically, I mean, every form of the arts except for television, has largely been destroyed, to a large extent by vulture capitalist corporations. And even in television, the rate of pay is on average half of what it was 20 years ago, even though they're producing more programming than ever, right? But yeah, it's I don't know where I was just going with that.
No, it's fascinating because I mean, and I'm kind of just in it right now. I mean, everybody in LA is kind of wondering, well, what's going to happen when all this is over? Is it going to go back to quote unquote normal, which is not going to go back to quote unquote normal. There will be a new normal, but will LA still be LA? And I don't think anyone really knows for sure. I mean,
Right.
I think most people are speculating likely it will. Likely a lot of production is still going to happen in places like New York, LA, Atlanta to an extent, but nobody knows for sure. I mean, it's possible that as far as show business is concerned, LA could just be another city. Is that likely? No, I don't think it's likely, but I don't know for sure. I can't predict the future.
No, but I mean, one thing that does seem relatively certain is that if housing prices keep on rising, they've been the way they've been rising in places like LA and New York, which of course both were centers of a lot of different creative industries and are increasingly less and less centers because people are moving because they can't afford to live there. So I mean, clearly, I'm meeting. Almost literally every day I meet somebody who just moved here from LA, I mean, and they're like in the film business or advertising or whatever, usually something along those lines. And they've moved up here, not even to Portland, but to some far off suburb of Portland where they could actually afford to buy a house by selling the house that they had in LA or whatever their situation is. So it's often something like that. But they're moving here in droves, of course, because they can't afford there anymore. Which then, of course, means that those of us who are living here, which is actually the most rent-burdened city in the country, according to the wages relative to rent, then we have to listen to folks from LA talking about how cheap it is here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, because it's like the other side of all that too is you have people, especially San Francisco is, I think, the most prime example in all this. San Francisco, they have a lot of these tech firms who have decided we're never going back to the office. Like, we're going to be remote from now on. Productivity has gone up. Our employees are happier because they're buying houses in other places. And the ones that want to stay, they're staying by choice. And we're just going to kind of keep it that way. So you're going to get this decent amount of space available. And, there's reasons to not be super optimistic that they're going to make the best out of it. But there is a chance, might be a small one, but still a chance that they could kind of reinvest in the city itself, that they could reinvest in affordable housing, that they could reinvest in just everything that at one point made San Francisco great, which is the creative class. They can kind of bring that stuff back. They have the chance to do that. Will it happen? I have no idea. I mean, there's reasons to be pessimistic towards something like that happening, but the way I see it, people got to try.
Yeah, people definitely have to try, and this is definitely a serious window of opportunity here, like we haven't had in many, many decades. And I think basically, the cat is out of the bag, or whatever stupid metaphor we want to use. I mean, basically, they by doing things like spending all this money to bail people out in so many ways, the Congress is setting a precedent. Like, this is what it's like to live in a country where the government actually cares about things like childhood poverty and housing discrimination and it's affordable housing. Whether unemployed gig workers can eat, and that this is what it's like to live in a country where they spend money on these things, because obviously they're too worried about the mass disorder that would result from an eviction tsunami of hungry people, all getting evicted from their Class C apartments across the country all at the same time. I mean, anybody in power anywhere can tell you can't tenably govern over a situation like that. So they are going to prevent those kinds of situations. They're going to try to spend their way out of the situation so that to avert a catastrophe. But what I'm afraid they're not going to do is change the basic structure of the society, which led to our society being as stratified and divided and homeless as it is, and that is, if that's going to change, it's going to require popular pressure, a popular movement to really push for not just temporary aid packages, but things, and not even just a living wage, but actual, real, practical, real rent control, real, actual affordable housing, not pretend affordable housing, not pretend rent control, but the kind of rent control that works, the kind that they practice all over Europe, the kind that actually works, not the stuff that's just on the papers that doesn't actually work, not the stuff that they do in California. That's not rent control. Real rent control. That's what we need.
You're absolutely right. And even beyond, rent control, living wages, and really what we're calling for is a complete shift in the status quo, because the status quo got us here. And,
absolutely.
I mean,
but the danger about living wages is as soon as you have a living wage, it becomes not a living wage anymore. The danger about this that everybody needs to realize is that at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in New York City, the landlords were some of the biggest supporters of the labor movement. And that's because they made money off of it. because as soon as the workers started making living wages, they could pay more in rent, and the landlords charged more in rent, not for better housing, but for the same housing. And that's exactly what they've been doing in Silicon Valley, and that's why all the people who don't make six figures working for Silicon Valley got priced out of Silicon Valley. And of course, the same is true for anybody, you know, not high up enough in the film industry to afford to live in, you know, LA or somewhere, you know, inner LA or wherever the, you know, the preferable parts. You know, I mean, it's the same kind of deal everywhere, and it's yeah, it's
well, I think people overlook, and not, I mean, probably not the people who watch shows like this, but like in the big scheme of things, the collective we, I think people overlook how important and essential rent control is, and all these other things that are a reality in our world that we could have. Rent control is such an important proponent of that. I'm in favor of a UBI and a federal jobs guarantee because we can have both. So I say, why not have both?
Yeah.
But I also recognize how not like how useless those things would be without rent control. With rent control, they'll be life-changing, but without rent control, they're going to be rendered useless. They'll be a temporary Band-Aid at best for a little bit, and then they'll be rendered useless real quick. But with rent control, they could change the frickin' world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
but as it is with these big bailout packages, I mean, what we're talking about when we're talking about spending, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars partially to bail out landlords who are not who have not been paid rent during the eviction moratorium because their tenants are generally busy paying for other things like food, or because their tenants, like me, are able to pay rent but are on, you know, have been on rent strike in solidarity with all those who aren't able to pay rent because these landlords are charging usurious amounts anyway. So of course, when we had the opportunity to stop paying rent without getting evicted, a lot of people, you know, took that opportunity as a matter of principle. But you know, I'm sure that most of the people not paying their rent are not paying because they can't, or because, you know, now that they don't have to because of the moratorium, they are prioritizing things like food and medicine. But you know, what's going to happen, you know, when the moratorium ends? I mean, there's a lot of aid going, but the aid is going, of course, this is taxpayer money. We're borrowing from our grandchildren in order to bail us out of this situation. And where is it going? It's going to landlords, you know, so that we can stay housed, you know, when they could just do something else like rent control or cancel the rent for the duration of the pandemic.
Cancel it and freeze it.
They could cancel it. They could freeze it. They could reduce it to 50%. They could bring it back to 1995 levels. I mean, they could do any number of things. And this exact practice has been done elsewhere. You know, the idea of freezing the rent is a great idea, but it's already completely out of control. So in Berlin, what they actually did in some cases was by legislation, they brought it back to the level that it was at like 10, 15 years ago. You know, and I don't remember the details, so don't quote me on that. In terms that wasn't done all over the city of Berlin, but there have been cases where municipal bodies have passed rent control legislation in Europe where they actually brought rent down back to previous levels. You know?
Well, in places like that, and I'm not saying that Germany is some perfect utopia or anything like that. Of course, nowhere is, but in a place, especially a place like Berlin, and places like Denmark, there is more of an understanding that housing is a human right, and they do a lot better. They don't have this completely unprotected Wild West when it comes to housing like we have in the United States.
Absolutely. I mean, the difference between most European societies and here, but especially places like Scandinavia and Germany, I mean, it's very, very stark. And, you know, anybody from Europe who doesn't agree with that has not spent much time in the United States.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Yeah, when
I mean, and you'll run into anarchists and socialists in Europe who love to adhere to the completely mistaken notion that all capitalist societies are the same, and you know, that's because they haven't traveled outside of Europe, obviously, because you can't maintain that illusion if you have actually left Europe at some point.
Sometimes when I'm having those conversations, I just say to some of those folks, I'm like, well, do you want to trade? Would you trade with me if you would you come? Would you swap with me? And then usually that ends it. Usually they're like, no, touche. Right. You win, Placone.
Yeah.
You got the worst oligarchy. You win. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you wanna know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you wanna know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together